Ayy, badass black girls, and they making big moves. Ayy, badass black girls, nothing that you can't do. They are the future, I'm trying to tell ya. They want the best, no time to settle. They got the strength to handle the pressure. These are the queens, nobody better. Yeah, changing the narrative, that is imperative. They about to rock this. Tell the women that you got this. Got no time for people who are toxic. It's all love, good vibes. You know I got your back, girl. Talking issues that matter. This is badass black girl, yeah.
Hello everyone, MJ here. Welcome to another episode of Badass Black Girl. We have a very special guest with us today. Her name is Christina Hammonds Reed, and she is the author of The Black Kids. It's her first novel, and Christina has a very interesting journey. We're going to talk a little bit about her journey as a writer. She got an MFA from the University of Southern California School of Cinematic Arts. She's a native of LA, and her work has previously appeared in the Santa Monica Review, One Teen Story, and other places. So she's been working on her craft for a while, and we're also excited that she's here with us today talking about her book, talking about herself. Hi, Christina.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
So,
So,
Christina, tell us a little bit about you, about your book, and what do you think makes a girl a badass black girl?
hi, my name is Christina Hammonds Reed, and my book is The Black Kids. The Black Kids is a coming of age story about Ashley Bennett, who's a privileged Black teenager, right on the eve of the LA riot. So, as the riots come into play, Ashley learns so much about herself, about her families, about the beauty of being a Black person, even in the face of intergenerational trauma. And it's really a story about friendship and love and just sort of all these things that are super important to us throughout life, but especially when we're coming into ourselves as adults. And my definition of a badass Black girl is it's a really good one. I think it's somebody who's unapologetically Black, right? Like it's somebody who takes pride in her identity, who allows herself to be whomever she is, and not just necessarily the stereotype of the strong Black woman, but if she's soft or vulnerable or thoughtful or loud or whoever she is. So a badass Black girl to me is just somebody who is unapologetically herself and walks and carries herself through the world with pride.
This is beautiful. I love it. And that leads us to your book now. Tell us about the Black Kids um, in the context of 2020, because if there's a year during which
Right.
the topic of race has been very important, is definitely 2020 when we think about recent years, of course. So tell me a little bit about why this book is such an important book in 2020.
So it's so funny. I've been actually working on this idea for a really long time because initially I was thinking of it as a graduate thesis film when I was at USC for film school. And ultimately, I decided not to do that. But that was back in 2010. And then in 2016, I wanted a break from the film industry. I was kind of burnt out and wanting to return to my first love of creative writing. So I wrote what I originally thought of as a film as a short story, and the short story got published in One Teen Story. And that's when my agent reached out to me and was like, have you thought about writing this as a novel? Initially, I was like, I wrote the story. It's done. That's it. But it just felt like the more I thought about it in 2016, the more relevant it felt and the more society had changed, right? Because like we're seeing the eve of smartphones documenting all of these instances of unequal policing and police brutality. And really, there's an explosion of that over the last decade, um, even just from 2010 to 2020, right? So the LA riots are really one of the first times when we see a civilian documenting an instance of police brutality against an individual. And back then it's with like a huge camcorder. But it really is like the first time that the nation and the city and all of us are showcased what unequal policing looks like. So when I first started writing the book, it felt like it was a way to use history to reflect on our present And then Lord knows in 2020, that just became even more imperative. I think we've seen, it's not so much that there's been an increase in instances, it's just that people are now forced to acknowledge that these instances are occurring. If before they were happening in our communities and people were like, yeah, that's what happens, now everyone is having to take inventory and say, wait a minute, this is like a widespread systemic problem. So the book captures, I think, a little bit of what we were all going through just a few months ago with the George Floyd protests, and what does it mean to be a Black person in this moment of like huge racial reconciliation. So Ashley is dealing with that specifically. She's been very sheltered from everything going on around her because she's a bit more privileged than your average Black person. And so it was my way of trying to navigate all of these really difficult questions around race and identity and class as well. Um, and I could not have imagined that it would come out in this year in particular, right? Like this year, it feels like almost the perfect year for it to come out in terms of thinking about how far we haven't come in some ways.
One thing that happens when we write, even when it's fiction, it's very difficult sometimes to separate ourselves from the stories that we're writing, because of course we get inspired by what surrounds us. But I imagine that being a Black woman writing about Black womanhood
Mhm.
and Black issues, you might have felt a certain way about writing about certain topics. So tell us a little bit about that experience, the kind of emotions that you went through writing this book.
So it's interesting. I'm not Ashley by any stretch of the imagination, but I was somebody who grew up predominantly in non-Black areas. And so to me, a lot of the book was exploring what that felt like growing up. Like, what does it feel like to be kind of isolated from the Black community, to feel like you're always the token, to feel like you're having to shrink yourself in a lot of ways to make other people feel comfortable. So for me, the book was in some ways a bit of a catharsis. It was getting it out on the page and navigating those emotions and what that felt like up until like my 20s even, just navigating how to be Black and how to be myself and how to come into myself as a Black girl in this world or a Black woman in this world. So that was one aspect that was really, it was both difficult and empowering at the same way, because it felt like therapy going through it. It was just like all of these insecurities around your appearance, around skin tone, around hair, around friends who don't get you, or friends who think that maybe your accomplishments are because you're Black and not because you're just talented at whatever it is you're doing. And really realizing those friends aren't actually your friends. That had a lot to do with my own personal experiences. And in terms of the broader societal picture, um, it's felt like we get a lot of stories about race, but we don't necessarily get a lot of stories about race and class together. And so, what does it mean to be one of the only Black people in a space when something huge is happening, like something like the LA riots, or something like the George Floyd protests, or something like the Watts riots, if we go all the way back? So, it was really about trying to navigate, like, how do I encapsulate what it feels like to be a Black person in a predominantly white space or predominantly non-Black space in a moment where what we're talking about is Blackness and race, and where the media is pathologizing Blackness in some ways. And I wanted to push back against that, because I think in a lot of instances where we're discussing race up until very recently, it was, um, Blackness is a problem, right? Like it's always viewed within the lens of Blackness as trouble, Blackness as pathology, Blackness as, um, these problems. And I really wanted to push back against that. And even the internalized racism that comes from that portrayal of Blackness. Like, if all you see of yourself is that, oh, we're a problem, or oh, we are the inner city, or we are teen pregnancy, or we are this, if that's all you're ever showcased of yourself, you internalize that. And so this was also my way of just being like, no, screw that. Like, that's not who we are. Um, that is not all of Black identity. And Ashley in this book is also realizing that, like, our community is so much more, and there's so much beauty in being Black. And so it was just me sort of writing all of that and getting all of it down on the page, just everything I felt over years and years of, I don't know, growing up, right? Like I said, coming into yourself, and that's what I wanted to capture, and also to make other Black girls feel seen, because there are so many of us who grow up as like the tokens in our community, and we don't necessarily have that down on the page. So that was that.
You captured it so beautifully, and that leads me to my next question, because something we get so many beautiful scenes in the book, and we can see that it's somebody who has studied the power that there is in scenes, because so much is told. You mentioned the media, for instance. So much is told through abstraction, through ideas that are not always illustrated by facts, or that do not incite the kind of emotions that your prose incites. So I wanted to talk a little bit about your background in movies. I just assumed that, oh wow, she knows how to do all this because she studied cinema. She's awesome. And let's talk a little bit about that. How your career, your career path has guided your craft.
So it's been a long time coming. I initially went to undergrad and studied creative writing and political science. And I loved doing creative writing. And I also love political science, which definitely finds its way into the book. But when I graduated, I felt like I'm not going to make money doing that. That's not a valid way to move through the world. Like, maybe I should do something that is a bit more concrete. And so initially I thought, film is another path of storytelling. And I love film as a medium. I love what both novels and films can do. So I was like, okay, I'll go to film school. And that's kind of something where there's more avenues for successful storytelling. At least that was my thought process as a 21-year-old. And in film school, what I appreciate about film is that film is kind of a very formulaic way to approach story in a lot of ways. Not so much indie films, but if you're doing like mainstream Hollywood filmmaking, there's like a 3-act structure. There's inciting incidents that have to happen on this page. So like 10 pages, 15 pages in, you have to have something major happen that shapes the journey that goes over the course of the story. And then at the act break, there's usually something that propels you into the next thing. So filmic storytelling is something that made actually writing the book a lot easier, because there's like a concrete way to structure something with film that you don't necessarily learn in creative writing programs as much, I think. At least it wasn't my experience. So I actually worked in film for a little bit, and I just got really frustrated because it was further, I mean, it was like closer to 2010, 2011, and I was really young. I was this young Black girl in this industry that it was not what it is now. Um, it just felt like I didn't feel like there was a place for me in there sometimes, and that's not to say that other people weren't able to carve out spaces for themselves. I just felt like I kept hitting walls. So I took the step back and wrote the short story, and that then propelled me into the novel. Um, so it's been a while coming. I think that that's something, if anybody here is watching and they're aspiring writers, it doesn't happen overnight. You see people and you think like, oh, they're an overnight success. Oh, no, no. I've been working at this for over a decade at this point, in terms of just various aspects of building towards a career. So for me, film was part of that journey, and it was part of learning to how to think about scene, and how to think about even like the music in a scene. The music's so important in the book. And I think it's partially who I am, but also because I think about, if I'm watching this on a screen, what does this sound like? What are they listening to? What's in the background? And what are the images that take us into and out of this particular moment? So I think studying film can be very helpful, even if your main focus is going to be novel writing or fiction writing. And in fact, several writers that I know actually have film as their background.
I wanted to ask you about the pandemic. How is it to publish your first novel during a pandemic?
It's so weird. It's really, really, really weird. It's a little sad too, because I feel like I would have loved to have actually been able to talk to people in person and like speak in bookstores and different conferences. And I get so much feedback online where people are thankful to me for having written the book, or say that, oh, this touched me in a particular way. And I would have loved to have had that in person, those encounters. But it's also just weird because this major life event happened, and it's like, that's cool. I'm just gonna sit in this corner of my room now and talk on camera. So it's changed my life a lot, but it also hasn't in a lot of ways. And I think that's a result of the pandemic, but also just the anxiety of this major thing happened up against something really beautiful happening in my life has been very weird. Like there's this very weird emotional back and forth where like the best thing ever is happening to me. And then we also have the pandemic and the George Floyd protests and this crazy ass election. So it's been a lot to like balance in my head in some ways. But I think mostly I just really missed out on the interpersonal interaction I would have gotten in other years. But I'm grateful.
So, Christina, where can we find you online if we want to interact with you, learn more about your work? Tell us about some of the virtual events that you have planned in the near future.
Sure. I am super excited to be in conversation with Tiffany Jackson for the Miami Book Fair. So excited. That was such a great conversation. So that's coming up very soon. And I have an event, I believe, on what is it? The 22nd, 23rd for Alan. It's a panel about writing about danger. And also there's going to be a Would You Rather Instagram Live for Y'all Right on the 14th, I want to say. So just a few of the things coming up. And for my Canadian friends, I'm going to have an event in Ottawa, or not in Ottawa, virtually in Ottawa, later on in the month. So I'll have all of that up on my Instagram later on as these events come up. Silly selfies of me in my little corner. But yeah, there's different events coming up, and usually different events with bookstores. So there's always something right now.
So, you mentioned the book fair, and I want to remind everyone watching that the Miami Book Fair is online this year. Visit miamibookfaironline.com. It's really easy to register, takes 5 minutes. You give your name and your email, and they send you credentials so you can sign in. And from the 15th to the 22nd, you can visit the Miami Book Fair online website and take part to conversations. Some of them are pre-recorded, some others are live. There is a schedule when those live events are happening. So make sure that you register for the book fair so that you can catch a conversation with Christina, for instance, who's going to be at the book fair. And speaking of books, I love your background, all those wonderful books.
Oh,
Tell us a
it
little
makes
bit
me
about.
happy.
We're so happy to read your book. Tell us a little bit about the books that you read.
Oh, so I am a voracious reader. I was like the kid who, instead of playing with other kids, I just sat and read on the playground. I was quite nerdy. My nickname was actually Reader Rabbit in elementary school, so that tells you that. But I feel like there have been so many good books that came out this year. Like there have been just an abundance of YA titles and adult titles. Like everything's been so good. So I'm trying to think, if I look back, what did I just finish? I just finished Transcendent Kingdom. That was really good. And I'm trying to think of what else if I look through my shelf, I can see everything. Luster, I enjoyed. I finished Leave the World Behind last week as well. Last week, I think to deal with my election stress, I just read a different book every day. It was like, let me not think about everything going on. I'm just going to read. Um, Grown, I'm in conversation with Tiffany, and I really enjoyed how that book um, really showcases Black girlhood and how, in a lot of ways, communities fail to protect Black girls, and the world at large fails to um, really protect Black childhood in a lot of ways. So I really appreciate what Tiffany does in that book. I read that one recently. What else have I been reading? There's so many. Let's see. They're all over the place. Everybody Looking. She just got a National Book Award finalist, so I'm so excited for Candace. There's just so many good ones. I feel like I'm just like,
I,
yay. The Long Way Down graphic novel is so cool. Um, and Dear Justice, what Nick does with Dear Justice is really just the opening author's letter had me almost in tears. So there's just so many good books out this year. I could just keep going on and on about everything I'm reading this year.
and I want to remind all our viewers to encourage your local bookstore, your independent bookstore. Christina's book, The Black Kids, is available on the Books and Books website. So, and Books and Books, the Miami Book Fair, are the good people of Miami who are working really hard on promoting literature. They are our supporters for this podcast. So we want to encourage people to support the Miami Book Fair, miamibookfaironline.com, and Books and Books. You can visit Books and Books at booksandbooks.com and find Christina's book there, The Black Kids. And you can visit Christina's website and find her on social media. Christina, can you remind us where we can find you exactly, what your Instagram handle is, and all that good stuff?
So I'm on Instagram at Christina Hammonds Reed, and that's where I usually will link to different events that are coming up or in my bio. And in terms of websites, if you go to Simon and Schuster and enter my name, it'll have a bunch of information that pops up with the book and about discussion questions and where you can find it and different articles. So yeah, that's where you can find me online.
Christina is fantastic. Her book is inspiring. She's highly Googleable if you just want to Google her and find some of what she's done, the stories she's published before the book, more information about the book itself. Christina, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you
You,
so much.
you are an inspiration. You are a badass Black girl. And we're so happy that you're part of our community now. And any word of wisdom you want to leave us with?
Oh, that's a good question. Keep on being unapologetic in yourself. I think for many years I tried to shrink myself, or I tried to sort of conform to the people around me instead of being my beautiful Black self. So go out into the world and be your beautiful Black selves, and don't let anybody try and ruin your shine, like hide your shine. Be fabulous out in the world, right?
Thank you. Thank you. We'll see you again soon. We'll be at the Miami Book Fair and continue to be fabulous.
Thank you so much, MJ.
See you soon.